Internal Revenue Service IRS tax news. Tips for troubleshooting common after tax day issues. The most common problem after taxes generally being a lack of funds, a lack of finances. I'm personally hoping they give us some tips, some advice on how best to get the best price for selling our old and most cherished baseball card collection in order to pay the rent. Let's see if they do indeed. We have the COVID Tax Tip 2021-73, May 24th, 2021. While the deadline to file and pay federal income taxes has passed for most people, some taxpayers may still be dealing with tax-related issues. Here are some tips for taxpayers handling some of the most common after-tax day issues. Check refund status. Taxpayers can check their refund using the Where's My Refund tool. So if you're looking for the refund, then you want to be checking the Where's My Refund tool. There's a link to that here to help you with the status of the refund. It is available on IRS.gov and the IRS.to-go app. There's a link to the IRS.to-go app here. Taxpayers without access to a computer can call 800-829-1954. To use this tool, taxpayers need their Social Security number, tax filing status, and exact amount of the refund claimed on the tax return. Once again, that usually being the stopper, that last one. So if you have your tax return in front of you, that would be helpful because then you'll have that information. Oftentimes, that's the case if you're trying to log into something on the IRS website. Then they often ask information on the last return that was filed. So you might want to have that ready if you're going to be looking something up on the IRS. If you just want to check this specifically, then you might want to write that down if you're going to check it at a later point in time, if you want to check it a few times throughout the day. Remember, they only update it once a day, I think, in the evening. So if you're checking it every hour, it's probably a waste of your time. You probably want to check it maybe morning and in the evening. But when you do so, you're going to need that last component, the exact amount of the refund on the tax return. So the tool updates once daily, so there's no need to check more often. Check withholding. All taxpayers are encouraged to check their withholding using the Tax Withholding Estimator on IRS.gov. Now, this is becoming more and more important for many people because taxes are actually becoming more and more complex. And just a quick recap of this, you'll notice that the income tax is based on income, clearly. And at one point in time, the income for an entire household was generally earned by often one person that worked at the same company for their entire lives. In that case, you can have a fairly standard type of income and predict what the taxes will be, even in a situation where you have a progressive tax system where the rates are changing and whatnot. And then, of course, now we have multiple people working in the same house. And we also have a lot of different dynamics in terms of family relationships, dependents that are going on as well. And then, of course, we had the crisis that took place here, and a lot of people are jumping around jobs more and more as well. So now not only do you have multiple people in one house working, but they're working multiple different jobs, and they're possibly picking up gig work and doing all kinds of different types of things that cause different income streams. That greatly complicates the taxes, because originally the income tax was kind of based on like a one-income family. So they've been adjusting it, but just note that that kind of makes it much more difficult to simply, have your employer calculate exactly what your withholdings should be to cover your tax obligation and take it out, and you can be more of a passive participant. The W-4 forms to get the withholdings taken out are more complex, and if you have other things going on outside of that, which most people do, then it gets more complex to see what the withholdings will be. So the only way to really do it now, and basically you're responsible for that as well, because you kind of get to the point if you've been working for an employer and your income's been pretty stable for a long period of time, you get to the point where you don't really think about it. You think it's like the employer's responsibility or something like that. But once things start changing, then if you ask the employer, for example, for help with your withholdings, they're not going to give it to you. They're just going to want you to give them the W-4, because if they give you tax advice, then they could be liable, so they're told not to. Their HR department can't give tax advice, even though obviously things are more complex these days. So in short then, what do you have to do? You basically have to make an estimate of what's going to happen in the future so that you can get your withholdings proper when you have a lot of different income streams. And so the way you do that is you could use software to do an estimation of the future. And this withholding estimator is basically getting to the point where it's kind of like a like a computer software, like a tax program, they can project out into the future. And you basically have to run a projection to really know what your withholdings will be. Once you know what your withholdings are, then you can go back and adjust your W-4s and or make quarterly payments. So how does this normally work? Normally, you look at last year and you based your withholdings based on last year for the following year. Now, this year, you can't really do that as much because many people for 2020 have a mess for 2020. It's not hopefully going to be their standard year, possibly. And then, so you can't really use that as the basis to estimate the next year. So if your circumstances have changed a lot, then you need some other tool rather than the prior year to estimate your withholdings in the next year. This is a tool that can basically help you with those withholdings calculations. Also note that if you adjust your withholdings at the end of the year because your income levels had changed, then you would have had to adjust your withholdings in an uneven kind of way to compensate for part of the year that changed. And that means that in January or now, as soon as possible, in the beginning of the year, you want to update your withholdings again so that they will be even for the entire year, so they can cover the entire year and be appropriate for the entire year. So many people overlook this at this point, and many more people need to do these estimates more, again, because it's just the changing dynamics of the way people are working these days. So this will help them make sure their employers and withholding right amount of tax from their paychecks. Doing this will help avoid an unexpected amount due and possibly a penalty when they prepare and file their taxes next year. Taxpayers can use the results from the estimator to help complete a new Form W-4 and adjust their income tax withholding with their employers. Taxpayers who receive pension income and use the results to complete the W-4P and submit to their payer. So once you get this information, what do you do with it? Well, if you work somewhere, then you got to fill out the W-4 and put this information on the W-4. Again, if you go to your employer and ask them for the W-4 or to adjust the withholdings, and then you ask them for advice, you oftentimes will get a rude response that you may perceive as rude because they're trying to avoid the question because they're going to say, I can't help you with that, basically, because they don't want to get sued for giving tax advice. So usually you're basically on your own to fill out the W-4 and then provide it to your employer who just needs to implement basically what you have put into the W-4. Also note that if you're self-employed or if you're picking up some gig work on the side, you'll have to increase your W-2 income either to cover your W-2 withholdings to cover the income from the gig work, or you'll actually have to make estimated payments, which also can be done with this estimator tool to figure out what that would be. You don't want to get behind on the estimated payments if you have gig work, because you can get behind real fast because you're paying Social Security, Medicare, and income taxes. And if you get behind on that on an entire year and then you have to prepay quarterly, it could be messy. Many people get behind on that and it becomes a problem. So the review payment option, taxpayers who owe taxes can review all payment options online. There's a link to those here. These include paying their taxes owed and marking a partial payment with IRS Direct Pay. There's a link to that here. Paying by credit card, or digital wallet, and applying for an online payment plan. So remember, if you filed the tax return and you couldn't pay the taxes, or you filed the tax return and have not yet paid, then you can pay with these online tools. If you cannot pay the taxes, then you can still file for a payment plan, and you can basically do that online as well. And if you do that, you'll be in good standing with the IRS. That's typically the way you want to be. So carefully consider if they need to amend a tax return. After filing their tax return, taxpayers may find they made an error or forgot to enter something in it or on it. The IRS strongly recommends taxpayers use the interactive tax assistance should I file an amended return. There's a link to that here to help determine if they should correct an error or make other changes to the tax return they already filed. So this has become way more complicated because if there's an error on your tax return, then you have a certain statute of limitations, generally 3 years, to adjust the error with a amended tax return which is a 1040X. Now, the filing of a 1040X is actually somewhat complex because you actually have to calculate the new return, and then the 1040X will kind of calculate the difference between the two returns. And it used to be a bit more complex to file it because up until recently, you had to file it by paper, actually mail it in, with kind of this evidence of the two returns and the changes that you made on it and the summary of the 1040X. So it's kind of a pain to do the adjustment on the 1040X, but you would think that if there was a problem, if there was a change, that you would be able to do that. I think you can do the 1040X online now, but I'm not sure you'll get access to like a free software to do an amended tax return like a 1040X. So it can be kind of a burden to do a 1040X, bottom line. But you would think normally if there's a problem, you would need to do a 1040X. That's how you adjust the problem. But this year, the IRS made a bunch of changes to the laws at the last minute and then applied them retroactively. And now they're trying to basically say that that you don't have to do the changes yourself because we're going to do them for you. So it's quite likely that some of the changes the IRS will basically do for you. So if you had something wrong, like say it was the unemployment income that you included on your tax return, but then they changed the law later and they said you don't have to include it. Well, then you would think you'd have to amend the tax return to fix it. But the IRS is basically saying generally, most of the time, no, you don't need to. We'll fix it on our end, and then we'll get it back to you. We will correct it. So there's circumstances like that where the IRS has basically made a change and they're going to adjust it on their end. Also note that if you made a technical math change on something that the IRS has, such as a W-2, like you got the withholding wrong on the W-2, or you got the income wrong somehow on the W-2, and you plug that into the tax return and it's wrong, the IRS has that documentation, and they might just pick it up on their end. They might calculate it as a math error on their side, and when that happens, they basically send you a letter saying, "Hey, we got something different on our end. We made the adjustment for you. Here's what the adjustment is." I'm paraphrasing the letter. Do you accept the adjustment? And then if it's right, you say, "Yeah, I accept the adjustment." And if they can calculate it on their end, if it's something they're going to pick up on their end, then it'd be nice if they can pick it up so you don't have to file the amended return. There's some things that they're saying they're going to do that particularly for. There's other things where you would think that they would probably pick it up if it's a math error on something they have. If it's something that's not a math error, like you put in money for a deduction and they have no way of knowing about it, so like an itemized deductions or charitable contributions or something like that, and they would have no other documentation of knowing about it, then that's when you would think you would have to file the amended return in order for them to have that. Or if you had like a dependent that they don't know about, it was a new dependent or something like that, they don't have the information, then that's generally when you'd want to file. But there could be a lot of nuance on when you'd want to file the return, especially this year. So you can check if you think you need to file an amended return. You can go to this link here, and hopefully they can answer your question as to whether it would be appropriate to do so or not. Sometimes if you file the amended return, you can actually confuse the IRS, right? And you don't want to confuse the IRS because then, stuff takes a lot longer and that causes problems. So common errors taxpayers should fix are these made about filing status, income, deductions, and credits. Taxpayers usually do not need to file an amended return to fix a math error or if they forgot to attach a form or schedule. So if you forgot a form or schedule, and it's not crucial to the what the IRS needs to actually process it, the IRS could probably still push forward with it. If it was a math error, like you did the thing by paper and you did a math error when you calculated on the 1040, or even if it was a math error from the W-2 data input to the 1040, even that you would think the IRS was probably going to pick it up, even though it's not a math error on the actual tax return, because again the IRS has the W-2, so they're going to match it up and try to and they'll probably make the adjustment automatically. And you can kind of see if they do or not. If they don't catch it, I mean, if you get the refund and they don't make an adjustment for it, then that's an indication that maybe you need to take action at that point. You have 3 years usually in the statute of limitations to take action. So in some cases you might wait it out. Other times you might say, I want to take care of it now because it's significant. So it kind of depends on the circumstance. So normally the IRS will correct a math error and notify taxpayers by mail. Similarly, the agency will send a letter questioning any missing forms or schedules. So if you missed a schedule, then you don't need to amend the entire return to send a schedule that's supporting the document. Hopefully, the IRS hopefully will pick that up and say, if we need it, I'm going to send you a letter just to give me that schedule. You don't need a whole amended return. We just need that schedule. But the problem is, of course, if you send in just that schedule on its own, you'll confuse the IRS, right? So you almost have. So in that case, sometimes it's better to wait for the agency to say, do they need the schedule? If they do, hopefully they'll send you a letter telling you so that you don't confuse them, and then you say, okay, here's the schedule, and give them any added information they're looking for. So those expecting a refund from the original return should not file an amended return before the original return has been processed. Currently, it is taking the IRS longer to process mail documents, including paper tax returns and all tax return related to correspondence. It has taken the agency more than 21 days to issue refunds for some 2020 tax returns that required review, including incorrect recovery rebate credit amounts or returns that use 2019 income to figure the earned income tax credit and additional child tax credit. So these were very complex kind of changes. They let you use the 2019 income, which is beneficial, to calculate some of these refundable credits, which you would think would be confusing, and it's taking them longer to process those returns. So some of the more complex returns and where there's an error, again, usually on some of these credits that are taking place, then it's taking them a little bit longer to process those returns, which is not terribly surprising given the complexity that has been added from those changes, but that's what it is. So there's some links to those items here. There'll be a link to this in the description.